People need leadership more than ever. Investing in your leadership skills now, if things before were nice to have, now they're absolutely mandatory in terms of leadership.
I love the name of the newsletter. Tech is such an area, it often feels a little bit devoid of the emotion aspect of it.
I picked this name in 2021 because I've been told that I care too much.
Irina Stanescu spent the last 14 years of her career in tech doing hands-on engineering leadership for companies like Google, Uber, and early-stage startups. She has helped hundreds of software engineers and leaders transform their potential into high performance via one-to-one coaching and courses.
And then they finally did it. It came back, said, wow, then they shared this thing and this led to this thing, and now we're so much closer. That was the mindset shift of speaking up is risky.
Any words of advice that you would like to offer aspiring engineering leaders?
Probably gonna sound like a cliche, but rely on your people. And
Hello, welcome to the Priyanka Shinde Podcast, where we dive into the art and science of strategy, execution, and leadership. I'm your host, Priyanka Shinde, author of The Art of Strategic Execution and a consultant for tech leaders. In this podcast, I bring you candid conversations with top executives, startup founders, and industry experts who are driving innovation, delivering results, and staying ahead in today's competitive landscape. We will break down what it takes to tap into founder mode and turn vision into action. If you are serious about elevating your leadership and execution skills, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. It helps the podcast and ensures you never miss an episode. Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Priyanka Shinde Podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Irina Stanescu. Irina is a technology leader, coach, and instructor helping engineers and engineering leaders grow their leadership, influence, and people skills. She has led teams at Google and other top tech companies, driving high-impact projects through collaboration, efficiency, and psychological safety. She writes the Caring Techie newsletter, bringing tech and emotional intelligence at work, and teaches influence in her Maven course, Impact Through Influence. Welcome to the podcast, Irina.
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I love the name of the newsletter. I feel like tech is such an area, it often feels a little bit devoid of the emotion aspect of it. And I feel like, especially with AI coming in. So I love that you're bridging that gap and bringing those two aspects together.
Thank you. Yeah, when, I picked this name in 2021. So even though I've been writing my newsletter more consistently in the last 2 years, but the name was from 2021, and it kind of was like a natural choice because I've been told that I care too much. So
Which is
I
actually a good
decided to
thing,
not
right?
take that feedback. I know, I thought so too. So I decided to fully embrace the caring.
Yeah, I definitely, and I love that, you go out and embrace, you're getting that feedback, and it means that it's a strength of yours as well, not something that you have to step away from.
Yeah, and my thought was my thought was maybe you should care more too, not me caring less.
I like that. I love that. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about like what initially drew you to the tech and engineering world.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Romania, Bucharest, Romania, and I actually started I started programming in high school. And it just seemed fun and easy at the time. And a difference between educate like school here in the US and Romania is you have to pick your sort of profession or major essentially in 12th grade before you go to that specialized university. So in 11th grade, you kind of have to make your choice. And I was debating between architecture and computer science programming, engineering, computer engineering, more specifically. And I kind of flip-flop between the two until I decided that engineering is my calling, and I can bring in architecture and building beautiful things and architecting into engineering because I like building things. So
Mhm.
that's how it all started. And then I think engineering leadership was just kind of a natural progression once I realized that I care not just about what we build, but how we build it together. And I care about the process of it as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm getting a deja vu here because like architecture and engineering was also the two things that I was looking into as I passed out of my 12th grade many,
Oh,
many years
wow.
ago. And definitely, I feel like it tells me a little bit more like, that there's a little bit of a creative aspect to you because that's what I loved about the
Yeah.
architecture
Yeah.
side of things as well. Is there's a little bit of creativity with the engineering aspects of that. And just like you, I had taken computers in high school and I loved it. And I was like, this, like, if I have to do engineering, I'll only do computer engineering and nothing else. Like, I didn't have any
Yeah.
interest in it. So, if I had not gotten into that, I would have probably been an architect, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. What a coincidence. Very similar story.
Yeah. So then you kind of moved into tech and engineering leadership. So then what inspired you to go from engineering leadership roles at Google and Uber to then coaching and mentoring folks in the same?
Yeah. So what I've seen in many of the teams I've worked on and roles I've had was there were brilliant engineers that struggled. And it wasn't due to technical gaps, but it was because they were challenging to influence and collaborate and essentially work together with others. That was one thing. The other reason why I saw brilliant engineers struggle was because of poor leaders. And I felt that in order to help these brilliant engineers thrive, there's on the work needs to be done in two fronts. One, helping them build the skills that they need, but also helping the leaders be better leaders to these brilliant engineers, right? So to me, this avenue was a way to create bigger impact,
Mhm.
and not just in one team, but in now I'm working with engineering engineers and leaders from various tech companies that go and then they branch out, right? Their impact starts branching out. So to me, that was a calling and a way to make a bigger impact
Yeah.
and a more, I guess, long lasting change.
Something bigger than oneself or like just that immediate surrounding. And that is so inspiring because
Yeah.
I really like what you said about like approaching it on two fronts, like engineers themselves and the leaders, because you're right. Like leadership is not as easy as people might think it is. And you end up having a lot of leaders who are not good leaders. Obviously, not by intention. It's just something they don't necessarily know. And as an executive leadership coach myself, one of the things I feel like it resonates a lot with me is that if we can shape the leaders of tomorrow, then they can also go and become better leaders than they got. And so that is what you're doing. You're not just like helping them today, but hopefully they become better leaders tomorrow. And so then um, you kind of break the cycle of bad leadership.
Yeah. And then the other key message that has been, recurrent in what I coach and what I write about is individual contributor leadership. So leadership coming not from necessarily people in leadership roles, but everybody.
Mhm.
And I think that changes the paradigm, and that actually is the future. And I've seen, at very successful teams are have people that are empowered to make their own decisions and think strategically and own things and have autonomy, right? Not people that are told what to do, right? So I want to nurture these qualities and these skills in people more, in individual contributors as well as leaders, people in leadership roles.
Yeah, yeah, that is so true. Um, for yourself, like, has there been a specific experience or a moment that has really shaped your leadership style?
Yeah, you know how they say with like teachers in school, you like a subject because you really liked your teacher. To me, when I was at Google, I had one manager who was the best manager I ever had. I referred to him often. And I also had a really, really good mentor.
Mhm.
And they made me realize, one, in the way they were I observed through them leading by example in a way what true leaders, the power of true leadership. And then them just giving me permission to lead in a way. That's where it was my first experience being a tech lead, right? And that's when I understood that leadership is not about rules. Leadership is about what your um, beliefs and direction and where you want to go with others and pushing in that direction and bringing people with you. And I think what was like key experience was them believing that especially my manager, believing and my mentor actually that I can do more than I thought I could. So kind of throwing things at me that I thought they're crazy or even suggesting that I should try.
Yeah.
And then it all worked out and it was great. So, and to me, that type of that changed my life, right? I got promoted, I got opportunities, I got the experiences, learnings, I got a team, that was great. So I really appreciated that they saw those things in me and they just believed in me, right? And so that's the power of a leader. Like leaders have that power to inspire that in others.
Yeah,
So that was a very transformative
definitely. I
experience for
think
me.
it kind of goes to show that if somebody else kind of can recognize your potential, which no, we sometimes ourselves don't have either the ability to do it, or just because we are so close to our own things, we kind of look at like all the flaws, probably more so than all the good things or all the strengths. And having somebody kind of give you the opportunities, I'm sure it must have been so incredibly like powerful and motivating. And I'm sure you're kind of passing on some of these things even to your coaching clients. And so, is there like a lesson that you seldom or like you often provide to your coaching clients based on your own experience?
Um, that's a good question. I think the lesson is that they're in control of their careers. They need to take ownership of their career, not wait for others to give them permission or not wait for others to create those conditions for them. They need to know themselves, trust in themselves, and look at themselves and say, what are the skills? Like, focus on growth, right? What are the skills that I have and what are the skills that I need? And whether they are in a place where they can build those skills or not, they're the CEO of their little one person startup being themselves. They have the agency to make decisions according to that. And that is leadership, I think, at the end of the day, right? Just taking that personal responsibility. And that's what I try to encourage and nurture in my clients as well, is that
Yeah, I think
self-agency.
self leadership, self agency, I think you kind of are spot on in terms of like, there's a lot, like, if you can lead yourself through tough situations, that also can help you lead others. And I'm sure you have kind of done that too in your own career.
Absolutely.
Um, Based on your experience working at like some of the top engineering companies and building high performance teams, what are some of the frameworks that you have used from your past experience in your coaching and coaching programs?
Uh, well, I mean, I've created my own frameworks, for example, for influence. I've I've reverse engineered everything that works for influence in terms of splitting it into building influence and influencing. So the distinction, the going hand in hand. I've used a lot of. I believe in communication and not just communication, but emotionally intelligent communication. I've also created my own frameworks for that. Decision making, I think that's another. Prioritizing frameworks have been absolutely essential because people need to understand, risk reward, right? Or what is high impact? How do I prioritize, right? Because at the end of the day, you can't rely necessarily on your manager to prioritize for you. So those types of skills, I consider them kind of foundational for, again, across the board. engineering managers
Right.
and
I would
individual
love to
contributors.
hear a little bit more about your influence framework, if you can share that.
Yeah. So the way we build influence is like, imagine a pyramid. That's the pyramid of influence. The way it starts is with working on ourselves and our mindset. And there's a lot that goes into um just limiting beliefs that hold us back from being truly being influential. Like, for example, fear of speaking up, not fear of I'm not good enough, or I am not an extrovert, or I'm, not like I am not a good salesperson. I don't want to, those types of things. So that's the first part, mindset. Second part is reputation and building reputation. Then we have relationships, right? Once you know, and reputation, some people call it personal branding. I've learned that most engineers have an aversion towards the term personal branding. So I now focus on career reputation, and that's it. And then relationships, work relationships. How, and this goes back to the caring techie and bringing emotional intelligence into it. How are we talking to each other? How are we listening to each other? And then finally, on top of the pyramid is the moments, acts of influence, where we have to get buy-in and we have to convince. But the thing is, we're not going to be able to use those things unless we build the pyramid, unless we have the relationships and the reputation. Sometimes it doesn't matter exactly what we say in the moment, and that's one of the biggest misunderstanding about influence, is that we think is if we can only find the right words, people will listen to us. And it's not just that. People listen and get influenced by many other behind the scenes factors, right? Their perception of you will impact
Mhm.
how open they are to listening to you, and so on. So that's
Yeah.
kind of
I
in a
love that
nutshell.
idea of the pyramid, and like you have to set that foundation in order for, you to kind of get to the top. And something that also kind of came to me when you were sharing this is, it's not just that influence can happen in the moment, or like you have one presentation and that's where you have to influence, and you cannot actually build the pyramid while you're doing it. A lot of this is happening before. When you say
Yes.
behind the scenes, that's kind of what I get, is like it's leading
Yes.
up to then the moments where the influence or the actual influence comes into
Yes.
play. And so that, I guess, yeah, I feel like it's really important for people to understand. And hopefully like they understand like that pyramid, the visualization definitely makes it easy. And I love that framework. So thank you for sharing that.
Again, it was reverse engineering hard
Hey, I
lessons.
mean, I think from an engineering mindset, that's what a lot of engineers do, right? As I'm sure, like I've done that too. Is hey, how do I work myself back on this? And I think yeah, and I like what you said also about like engineers have aversions to certain words or certain uh, ideas in how it might be presented, but it doesn't mean that they don't actually like the actual like impact or like the lesson behind it. And so just kind of shifting your
Yeah.
framework to integrate what resonates with your audience is also, I feel like, a very important lesson that came out of what you shared. And it's almost like you're telling or you're reframing so that they it connects
Hmm.
more with them. Which brings me to my next question, which is, obviously you're seeing a lot of similar challenges probably with the engineers and leaders that you work with. And so, what are some of those common themes that emerge in terms of like the challenges you're seeing, and how are you kind of working with them to help them overcome those?
Oof. Great question. That's through my course, through my one-on-one practice, I've seen a lot of common challenges actually. For example, engineers sometimes suffer from the "that's not my job." They sort of this not my job mindset, and they look at their job as being like, "Oh, I'm only productive if I write this amount of code. That's it. That's productivity. That's real work." and everything else is not their job, but maybe things like meetings. Even that to this day, I meet engineers who have meeting aversions. So that piece of communication, that's a
Mm-hmm.
huge area of improvement for engineers. Communication, doing the extra things, bringing people, aligning people, getting buy-in, right? Communication, I would say. Whereas for leaders, I think a big challenge is scaling themselves. They don't really know how much work they need to do down versus up and how to spend their time. And they usually either spend their time disproportionate down without navigating the upward relationships, or they spend too much time up and then they abandon their team and then people are struggling. And then I've seen just dysfunctions that come mainly from lack of trust, which comes from also from lack of communication. And so I would say leaders also have a huge area of improvement when it comes to communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah, yeah. I
that's in
think
a nutshell.
communication is so important, and I feel like it's a skill that you have to keep learning and relearning lifelong, uh, because depends so much. Like every time whatever communication you learned to do as an individual contributor or even a senior individual contributor is different, or has to become different or adapted when you become a leader, like a manager. So you're spot on in terms of like that being one of the biggest challenges, which I see as well. This kind of brings me to this when we are talking about leaders, right? And you're talking about like how do you manage up or how do you spend time, scale yourself and balance that managing up versus managing down. And managers right now, especially in the last couple of years in tech, have had probably a really challenging time. I mean, some of the manager layers are being removed. Managers probably have more direct reports nowadays because of like some of the flattening of organizations. What are you seeing in those terms, and how can managers best cope with these shifts that are happening?
Yeah, actually, this was kind of the theme of my keynote at Leads Dev Berlin last year, which is how to build capacity in the team you have. And the theme was how to do more with less as an engineering manager. And in the context of, yes, flattening, meaning now you have more reports, maybe more work, maybe you can't hire, or, things like that. And the key theme was, as the title was suggesting, building capacity and really looking at how much time is spent in each of the directions. And sure, like the framework I used there was the technology people process. So look at all these dimensions. How can technology help you do more with less? How can people help you do more with less? I guess saved people at the end. How can process help you do more with less? And how can people do more with less? And I spend the most amount of time there on people because that's the part where I feel like it's still not clear for many managers that the way to have a high performing team is if you step into a coach role and if you invest in them to be self sufficient, know how to self manage, know how to manage up and teach those skills. And other sort of dysfunctions that I've seen in this last few years where managers don't really know how to navigate anxiety in their reports. And so sometimes they share too much and then create even more anxiety from trying to be transparent, or they don't know how to help their teams focus and focus on what's in their control. So I share the pyramid of control, concern, influence, not the pyramid, circles.
Wow. I'm smiling because, yeah,
um, so yeah, it was
yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
in-depth.
No, I was smiling because I got reminded about like a manager, couple of managers I've had who you would usually like share a lot, and it would almost become like a reverse therapy session. And then I've also seen uh, direct
Yeah.
reports, manager report, who, sometimes, yeah, either it's like, you're being transparent, and so you share even some of your own anxiety or your own fears with your team, and that doesn't actually help the team, it actually makes it worse. And so I'm sure, like, the circle of control that you mentioned, I think would be really, really helpful, because it's managers need support. I feel like, it's a manager's job is harder than an individual contributor in many ways, because you're kind of like squeezed from the top and the bottom. But they often get less support because they're not an executive yet. And so, especially in terms of coaching and
Mhm.
mentoring. Um, you talked about, like, in the pyramid, you were talking about the bottom layer being like the mindset shift, right? So, like, what is a mindset shift that you have seen that has transformed, like, a potential in somebody into like really high performance, or something that you have seen where there was a lot of resistance in some area, and like getting rid of that resistance with that shift really changes the trajectory of somebody's career or profession, or even like the way their team operates.
Yeah, so as a meta, before I answer your question, so these mindset shifts, I actually like what I see that helps people is not just one mindset shift, is a collection of mindset shifts. So what I do with my clients is actually we collect these mindset shifts and we collect the data that is like in order to rewrite a belief, we have to get data to support. I'm a very data driven person, so we have to get data to support the contrary. So I make people keep track of that in their we call them confidence portfolio. But for example, some of the pushback that I get is on difficult conversations, especially that come from fear of, well, this person is a position of authority. Like, what if like they react badly, and giving feedback up. And that was first time tech lead manager that I worked with, and there was so much pushback. But what if this? What if this? And I said, just try it. Let's prepare. Let's script this. Let's write it down exactly how you want to deliver this. But and it took us like probably like 3 sessions of back and forth. Did you do it? No, I didn't. Did you do it? No, I didn't. And then they finally did it, and it came back to say, wow, and I wasn't expecting how they reacted. Then they shared this thing, and this led to this thing, and now we're so much closer, right? So then that was the mindset shift of speaking up is risky, or speaking up we can only with giving negative
Mhm.
feedback to your manager can only have bad consequences, right? So then now the new mindset is actually there's a lot of positive that can come from ripping the band-aid off these mindset shifts. So once you do one, they're like, well, I have the data to suggest that I did that one scary thing. Therefore, now I can try to, tackle this other scary thing. And so it kind of builds
Yeah,
on top of
that's
the
a great
other.
example. And
And in
Mhm,
incremental
mhm.
risks.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? Like, especially with this notion around difficult conversations, giving feedback. Even the best leaders I've seen are not able to give feedback well, and usually kind of like, wrap it in some other kind of vague conversation or a statement or something like that. And I think the idea of like feedback being beneficial, like it is something good you're doing for another person. It's not just that you're sharing something negative, but you're really helping them in the long term. And I think that reframing can take a little bit of while.
Yeah.
In terms of like other transformations that you have seen, kind of what are some of the trends or just themes that you're noticing in the leaders that you are working with today, or in general, like how tech teams are operating?
Can you be more specific here? What like, are we just talking about management? Are we talking about processes?
Yeah, I mean, either of those would be a good thing to share. Are there specific sort of management or leadership trends that you're noticing that are, say, a shift from what was maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago for today's engineering leaders?
Yeah. I mean, I don't from the people that I work with or from the people that I've, talked with. I haven't besides surely there was the
Hmm.
period of remote work, right? And that sort of changed how people that was a big change. Like a lot of managers were just confused about what they should do. Like nothing that they knew that worked in the in-person world worked anymore. And so that was a very, that period changed the dynamic a lot. Now, a lot of the people that I work with now actually are in person. So there's no more and or hybrid. And I don't see as much of just as at least from, the people that I work with, they're not as much as before fully distributed or fully remote. And I think that in my opinion
Hmm.
that's actually been better. I've worked until 2 years ago full time in a fully distributed team, and it was a challenge, especially like managing junior engineers that are fully remote. Oh my god, like it just took so much time that if we were in person, the way to create accountability or communication would have been so much easier. But because they were remote, sometimes they were nowhere to be found. So I was like, okay, now what? What do I do now? Right? When I can't find my team. Um, and so that, I think that piece was in the last few years changed how managers, it, I'll be just very transparent. Um, still don't think some managers really figured out how to have the same sort of connection, because that's the problem. I think the problem is they haven't really figured out how to really connect with others on Zoom or on video. And one-on-ones have been, and I've seen again, and this is with experienced managers too, they still don't know how to use their one-on-one time most efficiently. And with, doing more with less, most of them, not most of them, many of them have either reduced the frequency of one-on-ones because they don't see the benefit as much, or they don't think that's the best use of their time. But that time can actually be used very efficiently over Zoom and in person to really create that connection with your report. And so, yeah, that's, I think, back to, areas of improvement. I think that was one thing that I wish more people did more of, and like really focusing on that, connecting with the other human, as opposed to what got done, what didn't get done.
Yeah, I feel like there is something there, right? Like it's not like you come into a meeting and then you just get down to business. I think being able to connect with the team member really helps them like feel like, okay, that this person cares about me. So back to the caring techie, right? And I feel like not all managers are able to do that. And somewhere along the line also, because I've seen this and I'm sure you have too, is again managers sort of being sandwiched between like the top and the bottom. And a lot of times managers want to care, but in some ways the business can add so much pressure because now you got to get things done. So for example, talking about remote and hybrid work, we went remote, then it was a little bit hybrid, which people are like, okay, maybe we'll work with this. And now there's a lot of return to office happening almost 4 to 5 days a week, and not everybody on your team may be happy about it. Maybe you yourself as a manager may not be fully bought into that argument, but now you have to implement that because the management chain above you wants you to. And so, how should a manager navigate this kind of an environment where you have to do something because the business mandates it, but then that sort of goes against the whole like caring for your team aspect?
Yeah, well, I think you can achieve both, right? It for people, it needs to be clear that they don't work for their manager, they work for a company, right? So they can't pinpoint and blame the manager for a company level decision, right? And so you can still care, but you can only do what's in your power, right? So that distinction needs to be very clear, and managers need to set the right expectations of what's in their power, because they don't have all the power, right? There's a lot that comes from the top, and I think, transparency and honesty is the best policy in terms of setting the right expectations, and even being vulnerable about saying, hey, I'm not happy about this either, right? But we're all in this together type of thing. I think that's the
Yeah,
simplest way to
yeah.
approach this. And then what other ways that managers can care for their teams, right? And I think spending the time listening to their concerns, trying to address them, showing up for them. I think those are actually more effective way, because those are in their power, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Showing up for their
I
team.
really like what you said about
Yeah.
the ICs don't have to think about I work for the manager, but it's the company. And so understanding that difference, yeah, I feel like not everybody thinks about it that way. And I feel like that's a really powerful way of thinking about it, because then it kind of shifts your perspective and understanding of now what can I do rather than what I can rely on my manager or rely on the company for.
Yeah. And that mindset also helps when, if you work for your manager, you think, oh, I need to make my manager happy. But sometimes you need to make your manager unhappy in the moment, right? By telling them some things that they maybe don't want to hear, but they're realities and like concerns, right? Escalating things, flagging things. And sure, the manager has their person too, right? They might be unhappy about it, frustrated, whatever. That's their, you know, right. But that doesn't mean you did the wrong thing by sharing those concerns, right? So that mindset
Yeah,
also helps
yeah.
with
I love
giving
that. I love
feedback.
that. Um, there's a lot of change that is happening right now, besides what we just talked about in terms of remote or hybrid or some of the layoff situations that are happening. But just with the technological advancement, right? There is a lot of AI coming in. You're probably, talking about that a lot, or hearing others talk about that. There's a lot of automation happening as well. How is all of that impacting the way engineering teams function, or engineering leaders can function and help the team innovate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like, how they say more, how is it, like, this news is in development, when they post like a breaking news and then they keep adding bullet points with updates. I think that's how the story of how AI is going to impact us. Like there's new updates that come up on like again and again,
Mhm.
every other week almost, right? There is the there's the race between models. That's one thing that we're seeing, the providers. And then there's, I feel like, the tons of companies that are now building on top of that and building AI products. Now, I'm seeing one thing that I'm seeing with startups, for example, is startups that are kind of don't want management layers. They just think they're gonna stay lean and small and nimble for a long time. And surely enough, engineers do use AI to write, like to code essentially. Like it's AI assisted coding at this point. So the focus for them is to shifts more from being just coders to being actual engineers that think in systems and architect solutions. And unfortunately, that is kind of impacting more junior engineers and more
Mhm.
like mid-level people. And so the expectation is now for engineers to be sort of independent, self managed, and solutions oriented rather than just coding oriented. And that comes with like the management side. And my opinion here is, I think people who believe they can have companies without managers, I think they're going to have a big surprise, because at the end of the day, the reason why you need these managers is because you have people working for you, right? So you still have people working for you. And these people, like, there have been lots of studies and experiments trying to remove managers from the equation and remove this layer of leadership. And they failed, right? Because people, it turns out it's very hard for people to keep each other accountable, right? That's a big function. There's a big part of the leadership layers is accountability and alignment, right? And turns out individual contributors don't really know how to do that, right? So I think in a way, now that some people say, oh, AI is going to solve all these things, it's just like a pendulum that is swung a little too far, and then they're going to realize that no, they actually need people managers, and they can't just rely on engineers to
Mm-hmm.
do that as well. So I think that's kind of my assessment of the lay of the land. And surely enough, there's companies, like I've talked to people from big tech companies that are saying, AI is not going to magically solve your inefficiencies. Like, you have to go and look for them. AI is not like a magic pill that you just throw in there and fixes everything. Now, do I believe engineers will be replaced by AI? No, but do I believe that engineers will be replaced by AI assisted engineers? Yes. Like, everybody needs to embrace these trends, and change is difficult, and that's one thing that I've learned. This is the
Yeah.
type of thing that is kind of here to stay. It's not a fad. It's not, and it can help you. It can make you better. What are ways this can make you better is the question we should all ask ourselves. And I don't have questions. I don't have answers to all these. I've seen courses and things like that of how to engineer prompts and how to use um AI as a
Mhm.
thought partner. You being the thought leader, AI can be your thought partner. But even with writing, for example, sometimes I want to see. I have an idea, and I want to see what ChatGPT would say about it. I would say, would you answer this? I'm like, well, that's completely
Yeah.
not what I would say, right? But then it invites me to be very clear about what are my beliefs, what do I really want to say, and then I can use ChatGPT if I want to edit for clarity or so it's a collaboration. And I think especially with leaders, the communication parts can be, as long as you know what to say, if you want to put things in writing and write better, that's something
Yeah.
I see ChatGPT can help with.
There's so much that managers can help with. So, just like when you were saying this, like an example that comes to mind is you have your engineers, they can write AI assisted code. Sure, they can do more. And at the same time, you want to be figure out what are their strengths, which projects, which areas should you put them on, what are the best ways to leverage their unique strengths. And some of that you can only do when you know that person on your team. You cannot know it just if you have like 30 direct reports. Like if you have a flat organization, they can self-manage their work, but they still need certain amount of support in some areas, right? So it kind of almost feel like
Mm-hmm.
uh, when if I
Yeah.
take this analogy of like when you're children, obviously you need more support of the parents, and they are the ones who guide you, or they are the ones who can figure out, okay, how to help you in a certain way. When you become adults, you become much more independent, much more self-managed, like a senior engineer would. But that doesn't mean that you don't need your parents anymore. I mean, you might still have certain challenges or things you might run into that you either talk to a friend, or if, a parent is not available to talk to or something like that, but you need somebody. And you're right, like I think swinging the pendulum in a completely opposite direction or like over-indexing on something doesn't always help. And you probably need to make like careful adjustments rather than uh, like a whole, sweeping change, because there's a cost to everything, like you're
Yeah.
saying. So yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, there's a lot going on right now, but as you look towards the future, like what trends or what things are you most excited about?
I'm not gonna lie, there's a part of me that is anxious about what's going to happen. I am excited about the one thing, which is how, if we focus on how we're gonna be better, in terms of doing, for example, in engineering, right? The biggest joy that comes from AI assisted coding is you don't have to write boilerplate code, right? So if all these boilerplate actions and tasks and repetitive that like take up energy can be solved, and then you can focus on the creative part or the things that are fun, not the things that just suck up time. I think that is a huge benefit. Also, I'm actually excited about the voice AI upcoming startups. I think there's a lot there where like sometimes I don't want to have to open to take a note. Like I would like for better ways to use voice instead of typing, and faster ways to do that, either to collect my thoughts or to, and I do that with ChatGPT sometimes, but it's not, I would like to store all my thoughts somewhere and have like an actual assistant, almost
Yeah.
like a virtual assistant, but digitally. So I think there's a lot of potential there. Yeah, and I'm also kind of like, where's the popcorn to see all this the competition between models and the race, how it evolves in the long run. So that is it. But also in the grand scheme of things, like tech evolution will keep going as it's been going, but we're still people, we're still, we still work with each other. And if we forget that, that's when we're going to start, I think, losing. And what I think will be kind of evergreen is these people skills, right? Learning to work with each other, learning to talk to each other, learning to collaborate, learning to be better together, right? And I think that's like the, you want to go fast, go alone, you want to go far, go together, still remains true even with the technological
Yeah,
advancements that
that
are
is
happening.
so on point and like so resonates. There was a conversation a while back that I was having with another leader, and I was saying, like, we are all building machines, but we are not machines. And there's a difference. Like, we can't treat people like we treat AI
Yeah,
models. Well, this has been a
yeah,
wonderful conversation. And
absolutely.
before we end, any words of advice that you would like to offer aspiring engineering leaders that are, getting ready to meet the demands of like this ever-changing tech landscape?
Probably gonna sound like a cliche, but rely on your people. You have to go through this together. And I think investing in your leadership skills now, if things before were nice to have, now they're absolutely mandatory in terms of leadership. People need leadership more than ever.
That's very, very well said. And thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation, Irina, and I wish you all the best. And I hope that more and more leaders can take a cue from you.
Thank you so much. And it was great chatting with you and getting to know you a little
Bye.
better.
If today's conversation sparked new ideas or challenged your perspective, I'd love to hear from you. I work with tech leaders and founders to tackle complex challenges, whether it's scaling teams, making high stakes decisions, or turning ambitious ideas into reality. If that sounds like something you are navigating, let's connect. Reach out via my website, thepriyankashinde.com, or find me on LinkedIn.